I literally sent out hundreds of resumes, and I got so many rejection letters that my roommates and I did a wall and we just pasted every rejection letter. So we filled up our apartment with rejection letters. We thought we'd never get a job.
I'm Stan Christensen, and this is All Things Negotiation. Today, my guest is Paul Salem. Paul and I worked together in the 80s on Wall Street. We also went to Harvard Business School and were in the same class there. Paul then went on to have a very successful career in private equity, where he was one of the co-managing partners of Providence Equity, one of the most successful private equity firms of all time. In our conversation today, we talk about good deals that he did at Providence, some tough experiences he had there, both on the deal front, hiring people. We talk about his post-Providence career, helping out nonprofits in the Boston area, particularly his work as chairman of the Woods Hole Institute. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Paul Salem.
Great to be here.
So I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I don't know that I'll ever interview anyone that I have as much in common with, particularly about how we started our careers. Both of us started on Wall Street at the same time. And back in the mid-'80s, it was tough to get a job, at least for me, on Wall Street. I was at BYU, and I think I made 11 trips out to New York to eventually get that job at Prudential. You were at Brown, one of those, elite schools. I bet you just kind of submitted your resume and they said, Paul, we'll take you. Is that what happened?
I only could wish. I was a hockey player at Brown, so I think I got in because I know how to put the puck in the net. But I literally sent out hundreds of resumes, and I got so many rejection letters that my roommates and I did a wall, and we just pasted every rejection letter. And we would have parties at night, and you had to bring a rejection letter to be able to get a drink. So we filled up our apartment with rejection letters. We thought we'd never get a job, and then. Little persistence ended up getting me a job. And frankly, it was a job at the same place where you got your job, which was at Prudential.
And I remember us talking late one night. You kind of, again, correct me if I'm wrong in my memory, but I think you were, either you did a cold walk into an office or you said, hire me or else. Am I remembering that wrong?
So because I was at Brown, you could take Amtrak down to New York City. So I had an interview in New York City, and it was with a firm that I could tell right away it wasn't going to work out. But I was catching the Amtrak back to Providence, and I had 3 hours to kill. And I had a rejection letter from Booz Allen. It was a consulting company. And I just remembered as I was walking down the street in Manhattan, I saw the address, 101 Park Ave. And I said, wait, I actually think I had a rejection letter from 101 Park Ave. And since I had 3 hours to kill, I looked up and I had in my backpack the rejection letter, and it was from a woman named Sheila Smith. So I walked up to 101 Park Ave, went to the 28th floor, and I went to the receptionist with my letter, and I said, hey, can I see Sheila Smith? And the lady says, do you have an appointment? I said, no, I don't, but I have this letter, and I'm wondering if Sheila could just spend 5 minutes with me. So she kind of muffles into the phone and she goes, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith is not available. I said, well, I'm not really going anywhere for a couple hours. Do you mind if I see if she's available in the next 2 hours? So I actually sat in the reception room, and you could see how uncomfortable this poor receptionist was. And finally, after about an hour and 30 minutes, Sheila Smith comes out and says, excuse me, are you waiting to see me? And he goes, well, yeah, I got this letter from you. And she looks at it and goes, yes, that's a rejection letter. I go, I know, but my guess is that you've had a lot of applications for jobs here. And is there any chance you might have made a mistake? And that's why I'm sitting here. I figured I have nothing to lose. I was just waiting for my train. And she says, well, listen, and she had a stack of like this computer printout. And it says, these are all the people that applied, and these are the people that got rejected. And I said, well, listen, I thought I'd come and see you. I'm really interested in this place. I think it could be a great job. She says, well, thank you for coming, but there is no job here. So I said, all right. I wasted a couple hours. I got the Amtrak, went all the way back to Brown. The next morning at 7:30, and of course at 7:30, the phone rings. My roommate starts yelling, hey, Salem, phone call. I get it. It was actually Sheila Smith. And my guess is she thought about me all night, probably felt a little guilty. And she said, there's an opening today for an interview at 1 p.m. Can you make it to New York? and I barely could make it. I hopped on Amtrak, went down. I actually interviewed with a bunch of people. And I always love to tell the story. They said, well, that must have been a happy ending. And the truth is I got rejected. And
Well, they really got to know you, then they definitely were rejecting
yeah,
you.
well, I gave it a good shot. But the reason why I tell the story, Stan, is when I was interviewing for Prudential, and you and I ended up at the same firm, Prudential Insurance Company in good old Newark, New Jersey. On my resume, it said, I'm persistent. And so I'm interviewing with, I didn't know at the time, but a guy named Garnet Keith, who was the second in command at Pru. And he looked at my resume and says, geez, I don't see that a lot. Why'd you put persistent? And I literally told him the story of 101 Park Ave. And he pretty much hired me on the spot. And I love telling the story because I had nothing to lose, walking into 101 Park Ave, and I had everything to gain. And that was after 500 letters and getting rejections, I ended up talking my way into Pru. I don't know how you got into Pru, but I'm glad we did.
It's interesting. I'll just tell my story super briefly. So, as I mentioned, I made 11 trips to New York and got a lot of rejection, but ended up with a few offers. The pitch that I would make to investment banks was, look, these kids from Brown and Princeton and Harvard, they're just signing up at the career fair. I paid my own way out there. I'm going to get in here and kill it for you guys. That was actually a decent pitch. So I was kind of the underdog. And I had got an offer at Lehman Brothers, and I was really excited about it. And then I met a guy that worked at the Pru, and he basically said, look, we're late in the interview cycle, but this is going to be a much better job than you're going to have at Lehman Brothers. Why don't I call the recruiting manager and say, hey, he's got these 2 or 3 offers. Can you see him this afternoon? And so I went and saw Mary Kay. You probably remember Mary Kay.
Yep.
And she said, wow, if Lehman Brothers wants to hire you, we want to hire you. And so I was able to leverage that. And that was a great choice. All kinds of reasons that I was glad I didn't end up going to Lehman Brothers and ended up at Prudential. But in both of our cases, I think aggressiveness mattered. And sometimes when you're negotiating, a job offer, just showing persistence, aggressiveness. I told my students yesterday, in fact, I said, look, if someone came to me in an interview and said, look, I'm a person that gets a lot of stuff done. I'm not going to be, create friction in the organization. I'm not going to ask for a mentor. I'm not going to ask for a performance review. I'm just going to get in there and get a lot of stuff done and be aggressive. I'd say you're hired. Let's go. Let's get some stuff done together. So seems like that worked for you. I remember at Harvard Business School. So we both spent a couple of years at Pru and had good experiences. I think I rotated through a couple of private equity group, the investment banking group. I think, didn't you do a stint in London? Is that my memory correct there?
Yeah, that was, I actually worked in Newark for the first, year plus. And then I saw there was a posting in San Francisco for Prudential Capital. And I had never, ever been to San Francisco. So I went to my boss and said, hey, I see this posting. Do you think you can put a good word for me, in San Francisco? And it was the most fun year of my life because I went to San Francisco and I fell in love with San Francisco and Tahoe. And I did Prudential Capital for a year, and then I saw a posting for a job in London to actually invest in some of the first leveraged buyout firms. And Pru was a leader in investing in what we called then leveraged buyout firms, now private equity. And Pru was the first investor in Blackstone, first investor in KKR. In London, we were the first investors in Schroeder Ventures, in Electric Handover. These are names that go back, 30 plus years. And I just remember sitting with my boss in London, and we're going to meetings and we're helping these, what are now private equity firms, start. And Pru was the lead investor. And I said to my boss, why do we want to give these guys money just so we can invest in their debt, when they buy companies? And my boss says, you don't want to be Pru. You want to be these general partners at these private equity firms because they're using other people's money to buy companies. And that was it. I was done. I knew from that point on, I wanted to actually be buying companies. My dad was an accountant, a CPA, growing up in Worcester, Mass. And my dad always said, hey, I work for these small companies and they pay me by the hour. You want to be the owner of a small company. You don't want to be paid by the hour. My clients, when they go to bed at night, there's people, working at their factories, earning them money while they sleep. And I only get paid $100 an hour, to do accounting. And my dad never made more than $60,000 in a year. And he told me, own a small business. And then I thought, well, you know what? These general partners that were doing leverage buyouts were buying at the time small and big businesses. And I thought that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, interesting. So I remember you and I talking about that at Harvard Business School. And at the time, there weren't a lot of job options with the LBO firms. I think KKR might have been the only firm. I think Alex DeVab got an offer there. And, like, let's say 3 guys in our HBS class got a good, offered a leveraged buyout fund. I remember you talking about that and wanting to get that job, but there not being a job. I think you went to Morgan Stanley, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, I remember interviewing. I think I should have got a medal for actually getting interviews with at the time LBO firms or now private equity firms. But one of our classmates ended up KKR. The other classmate got a job at Forstmann Little. And so you had...
Is that Tom?
That was Tom Lister. And
yeah.
So you think about our 2 rock stars got the 2 best jobs you could get, KKR and Forstmann Little. And I was interviewing with every single... I remember there was a firm called McCowan DeLue. And,
yeah, sure.
And I had 16 interviews with them. 16. And then they made me do a psych test. And
and found out you were psychotic.
And after 16 interviews, and I was sitting in Shad gym, where we were fortunate enough to have this great gym at HBS. And a buddy of mine, I'll never forget, Dave Berman, he was interviewing there too. And he said, God, these guys, they interview you so much. He goes, even if I get offered the job, I don't think I would take it. So of course they offered him the job and he did exactly what he said. He didn't take it. So I'm thinking, I'm in, right? So I called up a couple days later after I knew my buddy turned it down. I said, hey, I kind of heard my buddy turned down the job. I assume I'm the only guy left standing. Am I going to get a job offer? And they said, no, your psych test came back. You'd be too risky for us. So the good news is I didn't get the job because that actually private equity firm ended up going bust. So maybe they interviewed people too much. But I wanted to buy a company. I wanted to kind of fulfill my dad's dream. So I had negotiated a deal second year at Harvard Business School to buy a little pie company, like a baking pie company called Table Talk Pies. It was in my hometown, and my dad actually worked there before I was born. And believe it or not, Table Talk Pies was the largest pie company in the United States in the 40s and 50s. And the family, a Wister family that came over from Greece, started this pie company. And they made these small little pies, and then they made these bigger 12-inch pies. And, everybody knew Table Talk Pies. And so I heard, and it had gone bankrupt in the late 80s. And I go to the family, and I see that they're auctioning off the real estate where they actually made the pies in downtown Worcester, a mile from where I grew up. I went into the auction with the family, and when we went inside the building, all the ovens are there. And these ovens are, no exaggeration, 100 to 150 feet long.
Wow.
And the founding, family said, wow, we could start making pies again if we buy this real estate. So we negotiated to buy the real estate, and that was all set and was going to happen by time graduation came along. And this was 1991. There was a banking crisis, and the whole deal fell apart. And I was like, oh, shoot, I don't have a job. So I did what I should do is I went on a trip with my girlfriend at the time, and we went all through Southeast Asia to go scuba diving. And I was thinking, all right, we did this great 6-week trip around Asia, and I got to Thailand, Bangkok airport, and I went into the ATM to take some money out, and I tried to take out $50, and it said insufficient funds. I literally couldn't even take out $50. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I need a job. So I had a job offer from Morgan Stanley because I couldn't get an offer, but I turned it down. I got an offer in January of our second year at HBS from Morgan Stanley, and they basically said, hey, you got to take this job. You got to accept it in 2 weeks. And I turned it down. So I'm in the Thai airport, and I did a collect call to a receptionist. 'Cause I worked at Morgan Stanley during the summer, and the receptionist, she always liked me. Her name was Marilyn. And I called from a payphone, a collect call, and Marilyn answered the phone. I said, Marilyn, it's Paul. You remember me from that summer internship? And she goes, oh, Paul, so good to see you. I go, is there any chance you can put me in touch with, her name was Karen Bechtel. And she actually put me in touch with Karen Bechtel, interrupted Karen in a meeting and said, Paul's calling from Thailand. And I said, hey, Karen, I know you offered me a job. I turned it down. I made a mistake. Is there any chance you could give me a job? And she said, well, you know what, Paul? I made 10 offers and 9 accepted. I guess if you now accept, I'll have a perfect record. And I literally started Morgan Stanley a month later. And I ended up working for Morgan Stanley for 9 months. In the meantime, I was always looking for a private equity job. And every month I would call what turned out to be my 2 partners, Jonathan Nelson and Glenn Kramer, and I would just ask them, hey, I hear you're fundraising. Prudential's the lead investor. That's how I knew about them.
And these guys are at Providence Equity.
These guys were the start of Providence Equity. And my partner, Jonathan Nelson, did literally hundreds of meetings. And he had a $50 million commitment from Pru and and for 2 years, he kept on pounding the pavement with my partner, Glenn Kramer. We're soon to be partners. And I just kept on calling and said, hey, when you guys finish raising the fund, can I get a job there? And 9 months into Morgan Stanley, Glenn and Jonathan closed on $171 million to start Providence Equity. And I called them up one day. They kind of were unsure if they wanted to hire me, but I said, you know what? I'm coming. And quit Morgan Stanley and showed up at Providence Equity. And there was really just a few people there.
Wow, that's a great start. So quickly tell the story about, it went well for a little while, but then there was some tension and you almost lost your job. Tell that story quickly.
Well, as you probably can tell, I'm not too shy. And in my first 6 months at Providence, I thought I was doing great. And when I sat down with my partners to get a bonus, and I thought I was going to get a $50,000 bonus, which was a lot of money to me back then, I got a $10,000 bonus. And I was shocked. I was like, I actually thought things were going well. And the 2 senior partners said, well, Paul, I literally said, boy, a $10,000 bonus, is this a signal that, you don't want me here? And I said it with a smile. And I guess my ability to think on my feet and do it with a smile probably saved my job. And I said, well, listen, your aggressiveness makes us uncomfortable. And that was they
told you were too aggressive.
They told me I was too aggressive. And, I was an athlete in college, right? I played ice hockey. I only have one motor, which is, you always want to win. You always want to try to be aggressive. But I always tried to do it with a smile. And anyway, I kind of was thinking quick on my feet. And I said, how about this? Give me another 6 months. If at the end of 6 months, you still think I'm not a fit here, we'll part as friends. Or if things are working out, you'll give me my full bonus that I think I deserve. And I didn't know for years later, but my partner, Jonathan, said, the fact that you were able to think that quick on your feet, I knew you were a good deal guy. And then those 6 months, I obviously toned it down a little bit and got him more comfortable. But at the end of my first year, not only did I get a bonus, but they actually made me a partner. And that was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me because, even though we only had a $171 million fund, being in private equity in the early 90s was a lottery ticket. And I didn't know that we would grow Providence Equity from 171 million to about 60 billion of assets under management over 30 years. But, we had a great partnership. We had really great people. And we were one of the first to ever specialize in private equity where we were focused on media and communications. We were doing cable TV deals. We were doing cellular TV deals and cellular telephony deals. And it really, we kind of pioneered the role of specialization. And I give my partners all credit for that because they're the ones that were the specialists and I was the more generalist, but it worked out amazingly well. And like I said, I hit the lottery, and it's nice to be lucky than smart.
Well, probably some of both. I just want to highlight your both aggressiveness and persistence, and those play huge roles in negotiation. Now, as you say, you were there almost 30 years. That's just not typical in private equity. General partnerships, I've worked a lot with private equity firms, and they tend to blow up over all kinds of issues. You guys had a consistent partnership for those 30 years. Did you ever, let's talk about some deals. Obviously, you didn't all agree on every deal. Can you think of a story where you had to negotiate with your partners to get a deal through or to kill a deal?
Yeah, I think the reason for our success is we had a real leader in Jonathan Nelson. Jonathan really is the founder of the firm that frankly raised the $171 million on his back. But he was probably one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. And my other partner, Glenn Kramer, basically, kept the wheels going and kept us on the straight and narrow. And so you had a really smart leader. You had a really good conservative, just amazingly morally ethical guy in Glenn Kramer. And then you had this aggressive guy. And for some reason, all three of us worked out and played to our strengths. So we had this really good culture, and we had and we hardly ever argued over deals. The way it worked is my partner Jonathan had an absolute veto over any deal, and Glenn Kramer and I had a veto together. So we had a good check and balance. And I'll remember there was literally one deal in 30 years that I remember we had some conflict over, and it was a satellite deal called Pan Amsat. Pan Amsat, you can't watch sports on TV. You can't watch TV without using Pan Amsat. They literally broadcast all the cable channels all over the country. And it wasn't a no-brainer deal, but we went to investment committee, and we did our typical investment committee, and then one of the partners kind of frankly was very concerned about the deal and didn't want to do it, and he was on the deal team. But he wasn't expressing that to me. He was kind of going, to the other partners and saying, I'm not sure about this deal. And
so let me make sure I understand that correctly. So guy working for you goes behind your back to your two general partners. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. And he had real concerns about the deal. So I get it. But I remember Jonathan said, hey, listen, I'm really concerned about this deal. Even your deal team isn't all that excited. And I said, you know what? I really believe in it. It was almost a de facto monopoly, right? You got these satellites up there beaming signals, and you can't watch ESPN without having Pan Amsat. And I said, listen, here are the 10 reasons why I think this deal makes sense. And by the way, I'll stake my career on it. So there's your aggressiveness again. And, I think my partner said, all right, Paul's willing to stick his neck out. You've got enough deal sense and credibility. We ended up doing the deal. We made 3.2 times our money. But I'll never forget the first board meeting, Stan. It was hilarious. First board meeting, we're there with a couple other private equity firms. And we have the chief scientist come in to talk about satellite health. And the scientist starts talking about the satellites and then says, and by the way, we just made it through the eclipse season. And I'd like to say that all batteries were functioning correctly, and we didn't have any anomalies, and the satellites made it. And I turned to my junior partner and I go, why does that matter? Why do eclipses? He goes, turns out that solar eclipses are the biggest danger for satellites, because guess what? They run on solar panels, and when there's a solar eclipse, there's no solar panel, so your batteries better work. And we did all this due diligence for months, and no one on our team ever focused on solar panels and battery pack. And I'm like, it turns out the deal was probably a lot more risky than I thought, but we ended up doing great on it.
Fantastic. I remember you guys did a lot of stuff in in satellites. I remember you telling me a story about, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe you and KKR owned one jointly and were selling it, and there was some conflict in that process. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, that was the same company, Pan Am Sat. And so KKR and we own this company, Pan Am Sat, and we were going to merge it with another satellite company, and that was owned by a firm called Madison Dearborn Partners. And so we had a handshake deal on getting the companies merged. And if we sell and merge with this company, we're going to make 3.2 times our money. So I'm pretty excited to get this deal done, especially after I stuck my neck out. And we had a person from Madison Dearborn and a person from KKR negotiating the deal. And I was kind of like, the third wheel, letting the two big heavyweights there negotiate the deal. And everything was going fine. And then the Madison Dearborn guy said something, the KKR guy said something back, and they literally started yelling at each other.
So you guys are all in the room, and these guys are yelling.
They're yelling at each other and literally almost got onto a fisticuff. And I knew both these guys really well. And
but your hockey background's about to come into play.
Yeah, and trust me, they're better yellers than fighters, but they didn't come to blows. But the Madison Dearborn guy says "F you" and walks out. And he had a house in New Jersey, and he hops in a black car, leaves Manhattan, drives all the way to New Jersey. And I'm talking to the KKR guy going, "Hey, come on, we got to bury our egos here. We need to get this deal done. This is a good deal." And I go, "I'm going to call a guy, from Madison Dearborn, who I've done many deals with. He's actually a really good guy." And I called him. He's still in his black car. He gets to his driveway in Spring Lake, New Jersey. And he says, "F that, I'm not doing this deal." I finally said, "Listen, if you don't come back, we're never going to get this deal done. Just give it one more chance." And he literally never got out of his car, turned around, drove all the way back to Manhattan. We stayed up till 3 a.m, and the deal actually got done. And I guess from a negotiating standpoint, I actually had a good relationship with both sides, right? Obviously, my partner on the Pan Am Sat deal, but I also really knew the other guy pretty well. And I think there was a trust that they both knew, I'm not, I'm kind of playing a peace broker, but I do think negotiating had everything to do with getting that deal done. When egos get involved, people don't see straight. They lose the forest through the tree. And, this deal made sense for not only the people selling, but also for the people buying. And sometimes you just got to, find a way to appeal to certain people's egos to get something done. And I guess when you play a sport, I played hockey. I know you played sports, Dan. If you're not a great team member, you're not going to be well liked by your team. And I always thought sports is probably the single biggest reason why I can persuade people to do something. I was a captain of my high school hockey team. I was, a de facto leader on some of my hockey teams all growing up. And you have to find ways to motivate people. And I always thought that sports, and I always tried to hire people that played sports because the greatest referee in the world is a teammate. And if you're not a good teammate, you can't have success. And I think in private equity and in most businesses, you have to learn to play in the sandbox well with people. And I think if I had to say one thing on negotiating, having been a teammate my whole life growing up in a hockey rink and having amazing relationships with your line mates, your teammates, your coaches, I think that's probably the single best lesson I ever learned.
It's so good. I want to talk about hiring in a minute, but let me just encapsulate a couple of lessons there. I found in my career very similarly that if I hired, there are two categories of people that tend to work out well for me. One was people who played sports at a high level. The other was people in the military. Military guys have colleagues. It's about the team. There's no I. And I found as I progressed in my career, there was just a whole lot more I in the folks that were coming to interview. And so military and sports, I thought were great places to hire from. Back to your Pan Am Sat deal, I just want to highlight a couple of lessons. One is you had developed a trusting relationship with both sides, so you were in a position to mediate, when it came to that. The second was you never want to decide something when it's too emotional. So the guy who storms out of the office, the guy from Madison Dearborn, jumps in his car and goes to New Jersey, probably that time, maybe he's in the car for an hour and a half. He kind of calmed down a little bit, was in a position where he could hear you. But people often try to plow through these emotional tirades. And I think pausing in negotiation and just coming back when cooler heads can prevail really can make a big difference. So those are two really great lessons. I'm sure you had in 30 years deals that didn't work out. Pan Am's a happy ending. You staked your career on it. You're able to stay there. Second near loss of your job at Providence, but you plowed through. Did you have deals that didn't work out, and what did you learn? Often you learn most from deals that go south.
Yeah. Any investor remembers the bad deals more than the good deals. And I have a lot of sleepless nights on our bad deals. And I think one of the worst deals I ever, did was this, internet company called NextTag. They were a comparison shopping engine. And we had a whole deal team, that done a ton of work. And, it was a comparison shopper. So, that by itself were a little out of our ballgame. But, company did a ton of cash flow. It wasn't a crazy valuation. But we were going to put in $600 million into this company that, lived off of Google search. And the day before the deal was going to close, somehow Google got wind of the deal, and the CEO calls us up literally 24 hours before we're going to close and wire $600 million. He says, "Hey, our site's been shut down."
Wow, that's a bad day.
And I'm like, it's a really bad day for the owners, and it should be a great day for us, because if it happened the day after, I would be...
You dodged a bullet.
I dodged a huge bullet. So anyway, we had some great high-level connections at Google, and we just wanted to find out what was going on. And anyway, Google said, oh, it was a glitch, wasn't meant to shut down. Turns out Google just wanted to know what was going on. And so Google turned them back on. Everything was fine. And we met with some Google folks, and we went back to investment committee and we said, hey, listen, good thing we didn't put our money in, but what do you want to do? And the deal team really wanted to get the deal done. And I was like, geez, you could get shut down with a push of a button. Look, how can we put $600 million to work? And we were all skeptical. And frankly, against my gut, I got talked into doing the deal. And I blame myself, right? Because, the team had worked so hard. We felt like we got lucky that we dodged the bullet, but, the deal team was arguing, hey, let's now we know what the risks are. Let's make sure we have good relationships with Google, all that stuff. And not only did we do the deal, we didn't even try to renegotiate it. and everything about it just, and I say I blame myself, because I should have known better, right? And what happens in deals, in life as well, sometimes you don't take the unpopular path. And the unpopular path would say, I know you've been working on this deal for 6 to 9 months. Let's kill it. But, I trusted my deal team. But my gut was telling me no. And I went against my gut. And so, fast forward, Google never shut us down again, but we were always subject to Google. And we ended up losing $450 million of the $600 million. The company just never performed well after that. It was a bad deal. Chalk it up for, thank God we didn't lose all of our money. We lost most of it. But, in the deal business, you can only lose 1 time your money, and sometimes you make 3 or 4 times your money on other stuff. So our track records were still great, but boy, that one to this day still haunts me.
I want to highlight a lesson there that's important. One thing you said was that your team had invested so much time in the deal, really sunk costs in the deal. And organizations aren't great at rewarding people for walking away from deals, right? I mean, the way you get promoted at a private equity firm and the way that you get carry is to be invested.
Yep.
And I just think it's so important in negotiation that you keep in mind that your alternative to doing a deal at any given point might be better than actually doing that deal. And I think people, when I was running an investment bank and we sold companies, I think we actually sold one to you guys, to Providence. But what we used to do as a strategy is we would call kind of the principals or the junior partners who hadn't gotten a deal done in like 24 months. And they were just so hungry to get a deal done that they would either overpay or invest in a company that was marginal because we understood their incentives. And we used to say when we would compete with other investment banks, no other investment bank is going to get down to that level of detail of know which partners have not gotten a deal done and essentially take advantage of them in the negotiation. The second thing I want to highlight there is just following your instinct. Sometimes, $600 million check is a big check to write, and you've got to feel good about it. And so you kind of learned that lesson there that maybe you should have followed your instinct.
Well, it was an expensive lesson, and it actually hurt us in more ways than one. One of my partners arranged for a meeting to go see this company that, frankly, I had never used, but he arranged for us to go see Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook.
And what year would this have been?
This had to be in the early 2000s. Facebook had, at the time, a $8 billion valuation and less than 100 million users, losing money. And they were raising $800 million, so about 10% of the company. And I met with Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, and he actually showed up wearing a tie. I came, looking like I thought I could be a Silicon Valley guy and not have a tie.
That's funny. I've never, ever. Mark used to be my neighbor, and I've never seen him in a tie. So that's he was getting ready for you.
And I literally said, "Mark, you're wearing a tie," and he goes, "I heard this was an important meeting." So he did not
probably about that tone, right?
He did not want to be there. And I said, "Listen, he literally gave the pitch that this is going to be a global platform and they're going to be 1 billion users." Everything he said turned out to be exactly what happened. I mean, his vision was to have, I remember him saying, "Listen, the most watched, sporting events, the Super Bowl with 100 million, 110 million people watching. We're going to have a platform that reaches 1 billion people." And it was hard not to believe him. And so the meeting's going great. And I said, "Well, we would love to invest, 800 million. But it would be the biggest deal in our firm's history. And we would need a board seat." And he said, "Well, I control a company. A board seat's useless. You're not getting a board seat. And you just, you're not going to get a board seat." And he goes, "I don't really care if you make money or not, but, you're not getting a board seat." And so I went back and reported that to my partners. And, our senior leader said, "How could we justify putting money into a company without a board seat?" And he was right. I mean, it'd be the biggest deal ever, and we don't have a board seat. But we all kind of knew that there was something special about Mark and Sheryl Sandberg, and we kind of thought, it's probably going to be a good deal. But we just had this experience with NextTag, and when you added it all up, we passed on the deal, and would have been the best deal in the firm's history by far. And so we had to swing at the plate. We missed it, and I could understand the reasoning, right? I was not pounding the table to do the deal because we weren't going to get a board seat. We weren't going to have any say. It would have been the biggest deal in our firm's history. But those are the ones you remember the most, right?
Any lesson, if you think of a negotiation lesson from that, what would you do differently in retrospect?
You got to understand who you're dealing with. And this is a guy that was young, and knew exactly where he wanted to go and didn't want anyone to get in his way. And we would never have been a good fit for him. So, you could go back and say, geez, if we had figured out how to maybe we could have done a smaller deal and put some money in, because you're betting on the person. But at the end of the day, some deals are fits and some deals aren't fits. And here's a guy that really, was being forced to take this meeting. I don't think he really gave a shit who it was.
Yeah. You'd mentioned earlier that you led most of the hiring. When I tell negotiation stories about the companies that I worked for, sometimes the best and most challenging stories are hiring people. Any stories from your experience hiring people and negotiating with junior folks, and lessons that listeners could learn from your experience there?
My number one selling point was we have a different culture than other private equity firms. And I said, listen, if you have a choice between Blackstone, KKR, big brand name private equity firms, or this little Providence Equity that's based in Providence, Rhode Island, you're going to have a different perspective. And so do you want to be part of a real team that, we value your input? We want you, we want to hear your opinion. And by the way, we're the anti-New York City firm. It's the same way we would pitch to entrepreneurs. We're the guys that we're like Avis. We try harder. We care more about the CEOs. We care more about, we just weren't that hardcore New York type. And that really resonated with some folks and didn't resonate with other folks. If you wanted to be at Blackstone or KKR, I would say go spend a day at each firm and spend a day at our firm. And I guarantee you walk away that it's a different culture. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But for the people that worked, these were real, what I would call family people that were actually happy to live in Boston or Providence. And that was a great place to raise your family. And, I used to say when you're a young person coming to Providence, live in Boston. It's more fun than Providence. Commute. But when it's time to have a family, do what we all did. Move from Boston to Rhode Island, and you have this idyllic suburb to raise your kids in. They can go to public schools, and you could have an amazing family life. And that was kind of the pitch, and it worked. It worked for a long time. And then when I kind of passed on the hiring to other folks, they instituted like doing, model tests. And, to this day, you got to do a model and show that you're proficient in modeling and how to do spreadsheets. And I was like, God, I'd never get hired today.
Well, luckily, ChatGPT's coming to the rescue there soon. I'm amazed at how good it already is. I did a spreadsheet recently with ChatGPT, and it's about as good as any investment bank or private equity analyst. One thing that I found running an investment bank, and I think private equity is the same, is there is turnover. People jump ship. And a mistake that I made, and I'd be curious as to whether you felt like you had trouble in this area as well, is just trying too hard to hold on to people. I would be so offended when people would leave after a year or two and really just not be good about that transition and try too hard to hold on to people that were leaving. Is that your experience as well? Did you make that mistake, or did you do better than I did?
No, I'm sure I did worse than you did. You get emotionally attached to people, right? And there were some folks at Providence that probably stayed longer than they should have because we were never good at ever firing anyone. And but sometimes you got to think about the other side, which is if this person's not going to succeed here, are you really doing them a favor by keeping them? And we had this one really entrepreneurial young deal guy. He reminded me a little of myself. And, he was so aggressive. And we always tried to partner him with one of the more conservative partners because, everything was sunshine and roses with this guy, and then the other guy would
Never going to lose money.
never going to lose money. But I'll never forget, we finally decided, and he did some great deals, but, never forget, we told this young man that, hey, you know what? This isn't the right place for you. You rub some people the wrong way, but you have such an amazing talent. You should be on your own. And there were tears, right? Because, you really care about these people. But he ended up starting his own private equity firm, and he ended up doing great. And, but boy, you never know how it's going to end. You never know if there will be a good ending to it. But those are tough conversations to have.
One thing that always amazed me is when people left my firm, just kind of burning the place down on the way out. And I remember I was thinking like, hey, they're going to ask me for a reference on you. And hey, we're going to see each other down the path. With that specific guy that left, what was your relationship with him like post-Providence?
I ended up investing in his funds, and we're doing deals together. Listen, I learned my mistake early on about burning bridges. And this is all being stupid, young, and arrogant. And it's a pretty funny story, but it's when I left Prudential. So I'm living in London, working for Prudential in London. And I applied to HBS. I applied to Stanford and HBS. And I got rejected from Stanford. And now I'm waiting to hear from HBS. And back then they mailed their letters on April 1st or April 15th, whatever. Well, I lived in London, and we're so old, Stan, right? We don't get emails back then. We get a letter.
I remember I got mine.
And, but when you live in London and they put it in the old fashioned, post, it actually takes more than a week to get the letter. And so I wanted to know if I was actually in, because I had to either renew my work permit, and plus I also knew I had a vacation coming up. So I called Harvard Business School and I talked to the assistant in the admissions office, and I said, hey, my work permit's running out. You've already mailed the letter. I'm not going to get it for another week. Is there any way you could tell me if I'm in or out? And they said, well, sir, we can't do that over the phone. And I was like, so this is one of my best negotiations ever. I said, listen, my work permit's running out. I might have been exaggerating a little because I think I had another 6 months on my work permit. But I really wanted to know. So I wouldn't let this, frankly, assistant get off the phone. And so finally, Laura Fisher, the head of admissions, gets on the phone. And she says, what's your story? I said, hey, thank you so much for taking the time. I just want to know if I'm in or out. My work permit's running out. Could you tell me over the phone if I got in or not? She says, we don't do that. You can understand why we don't do that. And I said, Laura, life's full of exceptions. Can't you make one exception? And she laughed at that. And she goes, okay, what's your social security number? So I tell her my social security number. And then she goes, do you really want to know? And I go, ooh, that sounds ominous.
She's baiting you.
She's totally baiting me. And anyway, she says, congratulations.
Wow.
Which honestly, as you know, that's a big day in your life. So now comes the stupid Paul stuff. I walk into my boss's office and said, I just got into HBS. I quit. And I gave him no notice. I went to Thailand with a couple buddies for 2 weeks. We had the greatest time. 2 weeks later, I come in to my office, having already quit, got to clear out my desk, and there's the letter from Harvard Business School. And I open it up, and it says, Dear Paul, we regret to inform you, you have not been accepted.
Oh my gosh.
And my letter, I'm trembling. I'm trembling. I'm like, holy crap. She told me I got in. Now it's early in the morning and in London, so I can't call HBS. And I'm in this Pru office. There's only 5 people. And I walk in with the rejection letter to my boss, and I said, I don't know what happened. I need my job back. And he goes, too late, pal. Get out the door. And I'm freaking, I mean, I'm basically in tears going, I can't believe this. And then there was an assistant and my buddy Rolf, who's like my best buddy at the firm, and you could see him kind of giggling. And I go, what the hell's going on here? They'd taken the acceptance letter, slit the side of the envelope, so they had the HBS letterhead, and they typed up a real rejection letter and slipped it back in the side. And they all came to my office and said, April Fools, here's your acceptance letter, and don't be such an asshole next time. And I've told this story. I've told this story so many times, Stan, because I was the biggest asshole, so arrogant, and what a lesson. I mean, what an amazing lesson to learn. And
that's so great. Yeah. Let's talk just a little bit more. We're running out of time about firing people, because firing people actually is a negotiation. I think both of us, and we've compared notes over the years, are bad at it. I didn't fire people quickly enough. Usually when something's not going to work out, what I learned later in my career is it's probably not going to work out. No matter how much you try or they try. I remember a specific situation where I brought a guy into my office, and it was a glass office so everyone out there in the bullpen could see. And this guy just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I'd given him a bunch of chances, and there was no way it was going to work out. And, he was in tears. At one point, he literally got down on his knees and started begging for his job. And it was just the most horrible 2 hours I've ever had in my office. So lesson learned there was go to a conference room, have a plan for the exit. I think you told me a story once about delivering the news at a restaurant that didn't go so well. Any lessons there?
Oh, yeah. First of all, when you think about private equity folks, most of us have never run a thing in our life. Think about it, right? Our job in private equity is to find great CEOs, invest money, allocate capital, but we've never run anything. So therefore, we haven't probably fired a lot of people either. So firing people is just not something that I have any skill in doing, because I just hadn't done it a lot. So we invested in Wired magazine, and at the time, Wired magazine was the hot magazine, and they had this new search engine called Hotbot, and it was a real Silicon Valley superstar. And the founder was just running the company into the ground. He didn't know how to manage the business. He was a real visionary, but we're losing advertising. We were pouring a lot of money into digital. And we came in with a rescue financing to bail the company out. And with that, we had the right to fire the CEO. So we went and talked to a whole bunch of the people underneath the CEO and founder. And they said, listen, either he leaves or we leave. So we had to make a choice. And so I thought, boy, it'd be smart to go have a nice dinner with them, tell them that, we have to make a change. So we go to this fancy restaurant in San Francisco. And I remember going into the restaurant, and Hellman from Hellman and Friedman was there, and he was having dinner with Craig McCaw, two legends in the private equity and cellular telephony business. And I had met him before, so I went over and said hi. And then the CEO and his wife comes over to dinner, and I ordered swordfish. I'll never forget it. And I tell him as we're about to, eat our entrees, hey, we need to make a change. And, we've talked to a bunch of people inside the firm, and it's like it's either you or them. And, we're going to, replace you as CEO. And he looks at me, and he stands up and says, who the F do you think you are? You're going to fire me? And I'm thinking, this is right out of the Jerry Maguire movie. I, I mean,
Are people turning their heads in the restaurant saying, what's going on?
everybody's looking, and I'm looking down at the swordfish. That's why I knew I had swordfish, because I'm kind of avoiding his eyesight. He's yelling at the top of his lungs. And I'm going, what an idiot. What the hell was I thinking? I mean, talk about a rookie move. Anyway, we ended up making the change, and I never talked to him again. When we sold the magazine to Sign Newhouse, and we sold the digital business to Lycos, and we ended up making a great return for all the investors. But that was probably the single most embarrassing moment of my deal career, and goes to show you what a rookie I was.
Yeah, firing, it's funny. There's just no place, Harvard Business School, they didn't teach us how to fire people. I don't remember any discussion of that anywhere. And so it's one of those things that as you get more senior, you're going to let people go. The lesson that we both learned on that specific idea is think about the venue, have a process, figure out what's going to happen after you deliver them the news. So I think both of us made that mistake. Oh, we're running out of time. I do want to hit on kind of your post-Providence career. I think you've done a great job working in the community and giving back. Why don't you tell the story? One of the organizations that you're involved in is the Woods Hole Institute. How'd you get involved there? And how has negotiation played a role in that chapter of your career?
Yeah, I was fortunate that I always thought it's important for us to give back. Private equity has been good to so many people, and frankly, I'm going to give away 90% of the money I've made. And so I was on a board of a company called Year Up, founded by a guy named Gerald Tratavi, and I was on the board for over 20 years, chair for 11 years. And we've taken inner city urban young adults, and we get them jobs at Facebook, or now Meta, Google, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. And what we found is urban young adults just want an opportunity, and our job was to close the opportunity divide. We've helped over 50,000 what we call opportunity youth get jobs in big real companies and just give them a chance. Matter of fact, we had our first Year Up student graduate from Harvard Business School, which is really amazing. And
fantastic.
And he was either going to go to jail or, go to Year Up. And now look at him. He's doing great. So I did that for years. And then after, being on the board for so long, I retired from Providence Equity, and I did a program at Harvard called the Advanced Leadership Initiative, the ALI program. And it takes people who've had success in their life, and they said, now use your network and your connections to actually help make the world a better place. And I started, right after, really during COVID. And I said, I want to learn about climate change. I want to learn about the oceans. I live on the ocean. I love the oceans. And frankly, I was never a climate denier, but I didn't understand climate. And I wanted to learn. And so I cold called the Woods Hole Oceanographic and said to the CEO, hey, I want to learn about the oceans. I'll make a donation, but can you spend some time with me? And since it was during COVID, I had access to all these scientists, and we were 6 feet apart, and they would come tell me about the amazing work that they do at the Woods Hole Oceanographic, the world's largest oceanographic institute, where we have 1,100 scientists and engineers, and all they do is, figure out how to help save our planet and our oceans. And that meeting, I was so blown away with the work that, I said, I want to get involved. And the CEO had done a little research and knew that, at Year Up, we had raised over $500 million and had really became a well-known nonprofit. And his chairman was resigning at the end of the year. And so behind my back, he went to his board and said, Paul would be the perfect chair for Woods Hole, even though I'd never been on the board. And they voted me unanimously to become the next chair of Woods Hole Oceanographic. And when you think about our planet, we call it planet Earth. It should be called planet Ocean, right? Because 70% of our planet is the ocean. And if you actually want to save our planet, you have to save the ocean. And if you want to actually help with climate change, the only way to actually affect climate change is through the ocean. And it's been one of the most rewarding things I've done, and fortunate that I get to help lead that institution and we'll see if we can make a dent in, I do think climate is a big problem. And I actually think that we spend way too much time trying to convince people that climate's an issue. I don't think we need to convince people. I think we need to innovate and invent our way into a solution. And we will do that. I'm not worried about our planet because there's too many smart people focused on this, and we're actually gonna solve climate through innovation in new technologies. And I'm not too worried about, we should be worried, but we're gonna solve it.
I like the optimism. Just want to highlight that really that role also just going all the way back to the Morgan Stanley, Providence Equity, you kind of got each of those jobs by either a cold call or by being aggressive. And so that's just been such a consistent theme throughout your career, and it's really paid off. Let me end with just a few rapid fire questions here. Most persuasive person that you've ever met, and why?
I met Richard Branson a bunch of times because we'd go vacation in the British Virgin Islands. And he's got a certain optimism and charm about him that just blows me away. And he convinced me to buy an island with him and some other folks just based on belief that, look at how much fun he has, we can have the same amount of fun. We ended about 10 of us bought this island called Mosquito Island, all based on Branson's persuasion. And my kids love it. We love it. I don't know if it'll ever be a good real estate investment, but boy, we have a great time. And for him to convince people to shell out so much money to buy land in a Caribbean island, he's pretty persuasive.
Amazing. Speaking of kids, how do you negotiate with your kids? Do you do that differently than employees at Providence?
I have 4 daughters. I am a girl dad. There's nothing more important in my life than my 4 daughters. I see them all the time. I love them to death. I don't negotiate with my daughters. They own me. They boss me around. There is no negotiation. They know exactly who I am. They know I'm a sucker. And I got great daughters, but boy, I try to negotiate them. I try to incentivize with them. And they just give me that little smile, that little hug, and I melt. And it's not even trying to win an argument. They just own me.
Girls can be very persuasive. I've got 2, and they're quite persuasive. If you're giving advice, final question here, if you're giving advice to young people starting out their career about how to learn negotiation, so many of the stories that you have told have been interpersonal. Lots of the jobs these days, I think, at Stanford, computer science is the largest major. What would you recommend to young people that want to get experience negotiating and how to learn it?
You got to have, the first thing you have to believe in yourself. Okay? You're not going to negotiate or convince anyone to change their mind or do anything unless you believe in yourself. And today's kids, today's young adults, I don't see the confidence level that I used to see with a lot of kids that I grew up with. Social media causes anxiety. Social media probably causes some doubt. But you're never going to be a great negotiator. You're never going to be great at convincing people of anything unless you believe in yourself first. And when I go lecture at, high schools or, I did a TED Talk based on luck. And, I always make every high school class that I talk to first watch my TED Talk. And my whole TED Talk is not only, I grew up believing I was lucky because I was brainwashed by my dad, but I also believed in myself because I believed that I was lucky and I believed good things would happen. Maybe I had too much confidence growing up. Maybe I had too much arrogance. Maybe I was too aggressive, but it served me well. And I always say, if you're going to be confident, do it with a smile. And if you do it with a smile, good things are going to happen.
Fantastic. And that TED Talk, we'll put a link to it in our show notes. Would you mind just taking 2 minutes and just give us kind of a very brief version of the story where you had this catharsis about how lucky you are?
Well, I was living in London and it was Christmas time. So I'm going to go home for Christmas. And I came over to London in January. So I actually hadn't been home for almost a year. And I booked a ticket to go home. And I bought the cheapest ticket I could find. And it was on a flight through New York City. And then you take the shuttle up to Boston because I eventually was going to go to Boston. And I just told my parents I'm landing in Boston on such and such date at this time. And a week before the flight, and I bought a non-refundable ticket, but the week before my flight, my best buddy in my office, Rolf, said, "Hey, how are you going home for Christmas?" I said, "I bought a cheap ticket." He goes, in the company manual, because you're an expat, you get a free ticket home for holidays. And I literally said, I didn't even know we had a company manual. I'm not the most detail-oriented guy. And there, sure enough, as an expat, I got a free flight home. So I booked a British Airways flight direct from, Heathrow to Boston, but I never told my parents I'd switch flights. And I was getting in at the exact same time anyway, so it didn't matter. And I landed at Logan, and my parents weren't there to pick me up, and I couldn't understand why. And my first thought was, my dad had been sick. If my parents aren't picking me up at Logan Airport, something's really bad. I call home on a payphone, and my mother answers, and she's crying. And I still get emotional about this. And my older brother gets on the phone because my mother couldn't talk. My mother was a tough Italian. She never cried. And I'm like, I said to my brother, "Where the fuck are you guys?" and I'm at, and he goes, "Where the F are you?" I said, "I'm at Logan." He goes, "Your plane blew up."
Wow.
And I said, "What are you talking about?" That's how I found out. I had booked on the Pan Am flight through New York, the Pan Am flight that blew up over Lockerbie, Scotland. And just by pure luck, I switched flights to the British Airways flight. And, back then, all they could get confirmation from Pan Am flight that I had a ticket on it. So they just assumed for good 6 hours that I had died. And anyway, good news is my dad wasn't sick, and I finally got home. And but awful that so many Americans died on that flight, and by pure luck, I switched flights. And I owe my buddy who told me, we have a company manual that paid for a free flight home.
Wow. I mean, stories like that. Thank you for sharing that. The perspective you get. I lost a brother a few years ago, and ever since that, I've just felt like life is short, life is dear. We've got to make the most of it. And you've had a great career, a great post-career, great family, and just really appreciate you being on the show today, Paul.
Great to reconnect, Stan, and appreciate it. And best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to All Things Negotiation. Please subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend, and be sure to engage with us on social media. Your likes, comments, and reposts make a big difference and help others find the show. The show was produced by Ezra Trupiano, original music by Peter Breinhold, and designed by Aubrey Benson. Thanks for listening.